bog was a very, very special place. The ancient Irish believed in sun worship. But now you have to remember that ancient Ireland was covered by great oak trees, great oak woods. So there was a canopy almost everywhere you went. So if you wanted to go and observe the sky, you could go out onto a mountaintop, you could go out into a lake, maybe onto an island in a lake, or you could go out on a peat bog. And all of those places were places where we know ritual activity took place. Now, the Irish conceived of the bogs as a red landscape. The peat itself was considered to be red. And we have a description of the god Dod Derga, where a king was ritually killed. One of the great stories, Dod Derga's hostel. The king Connemara dies in this particular story at Samhain, at Halloween. But Dod Derga is described, and he has red cheeks and red eyebrows, and that's the colour of the peat. He has a green cloak, which of course is the vegetation on top of the bog. But he wears a white shirt with a white hood, with a red speckled insert. Now you think, what's that about? Well, that is the bog cotton. And the bog cotton has a red speckle at the end of the stalk.
Okay.
So you've actually got a description of a god that is based on an observation of this landscape. So the peat is red, and you say, well, why? In ancient times people said, why is the peat red? Well, the peat is red because the sun at night goes under the ground.
Oh, I see.
And the bog is an opening into the other world.
Okay.
It's an entry point into the other world, and it is coloured. The soil there is coloured by the sun when it's resting in its chamber at night.
Now, Dr. Kelly, how much can we know about the identity of these people, their lifestyle, just by looking at the bodies themselves?
Okay. Well, the first thing we can say is that all of the prehistoric bog bodies of men who were murdered, because there are other categories of bodies as well from a later period, they're all mature adults between the ages of 25 and 40. We don't have women and children, so they seem to be a particular group. The researches which I've undertaken suggests that these are the bodies of ancient kings whose kingship for some reason or other has failed, and they have been sacrificed to the goddess to whom they were wed at their inauguration ceremony, and replaced by a new king. In other words, the goddess has been given a new consort that will return her to fertility, and the people will be looked after as a consequence of that. Now, there are a number of indications that show that these are men of high status. In the first instance, when we look at the hands of a number of them, where the hands are well preserved, like in O'Crohan man, for example, there's absolutely no calluses or marks at all on his hands. This is a man who never engaged in manual work, and his fingernails are beautifully manicured. Now, we know that ancient Irish kings were forbidden to undertake physical work. If they did that, they would lose their status. They would be reduced to the ranks, as it were. So ancient kings did not engage in manual labour. In the case of Cloney Cavan man, he had a very, it's a bog body from County Meath, he had a very unusual hairstyle. It was sort of a ridge of hair down the centre of the head, which was held in place by a type of a hair gel which used a pine resin from pine trees that grow in the Pyrenees mountains between France and Spain. So here was somebody who could command the resources necessary to acquire very
imported hair gel.
well, very expensive foreign imports.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you need considerable wherewithal for that.
Okay.
So these are the types of indications. Also, we can see that they were very well nourished. You know, these were men who were, you know, living well within those societies. In the case of O'Crohan man, he had a very substantial meat-rich diet. So lots of steak and so on.
And this can be the stomach is actually preserved. Is that how you tell this, or?
No, well, the stomach was preserved in that instance, but that wasn't how we could work out the diet of O'Crohan man. We are what we eat.
Okay.
And different types of food leave different chemical traces. And those chemical traces are left in our hair.
Okay.
And as our hair grows, it leaves a continuous record of the chemicals present from your diet. So by looking at that, we can tell whether you've got a substantially meat-rich diet or a substantially vegetable-rich diet. So there are a number of indications. But in the case of O'Crohan man as well, his stomach contents were present. And unlike his normal diet of meat, he got a final meal of cereals and buttermilk. Now that's quite significant in terms of a ritual meal, because all of the accounts relating to Irish kingship and the duty of kings tells us that the king must, through his marriage with the goddess, who is the land itself, he must ensure an abundance of corn and milk for the people. So when we see this ritual meal, we can assume that perhaps something has gone wrong, maybe the crops have failed and so on. This king is being fed the very things that he is to take into the other world with him to seek the generosity of the goddess in return for the sacrifice of her spouse.
So Ned, tell us how it is that a body comes to be preserved in a bog, because these are not skeletons. They actually have skin and hair and fingernails and fingerprints. How is it that the bog preserves these soft tissues so well?
There are actually a number of reasons why the bogs preserve human tissue. First of all, the bogs contain tannic acid. And tannic acid is what's used to tan hides to make leather. So it's this naturally occurring tannic acid which converts the skin into leather. There are also the sphagnum moss, which is one of the main constituents of the Irish raised bogs in particular, has an antibacterial quality to it. In fact, it was used as bandages, as wound dressing during the First World War.
Okay.
So that kills off bacteria, and of course the bacteria is required to break down the human body and decompose it. And the general lack of oxygen as well in the bog inhibits microbial action and so on. So all of these factors operate to preserve and mummify the body. There's some unhappy aspects to the bog as well. The bogs being very acid, they destroy the DNA in the bodies. So you don't have an opportunity of checking out the DNA. And also the bone within the body being alkaline is attacked by the acid, so very often the bone is completely gone even though the body is preserved.
That's so interesting. So they're not mummified by any intentional human action. It's a natural mummification, actually.
No, it seems there was no deliberate intention to mummify the bodies. We have a reference in one of the early Irish annals to a king of Tara who was killed under mysterious circumstances, or died under mysterious circumstances. And 40 years later, he was dug up by his son who succeeded him in the kingship. And the annals say that the body of the king was perfectly preserved. And this was a matter of great surprise to the men of Erin. So at least the annalists weren't aware of the preserved in qualities
Okay.
of the bogs,
That's
according to
fascinating.
that report.
Yeah. Oh, that is.
As late, I mean, we have stories in modern folklore which describe the bogs as places which are entry portals to the other world. And we've one particular story of a man who is being disposed of by his neighbours because they want to rob all his cattle. It's all to do with cattle, everything in Ireland is to do with cattle.
That's right.
They want his cattle and his land. So it's about ownership of land and ownership of cattle. So they put him in a bag and they're taking him off to throw him into a bog hole. But it's a very hot day, so they put the bag down and go in for a drink. And somebody comes by and he sees there's somebody in the bag and inquires what's up here. So the guy in the bag says, I've been taken off to be married to a rich princess, but I don't want to marry her. So anyway, they change places. Right? But it's very interesting that the reference is to marriage to a princess,
Yeah,
because
like the goddess.
it's married to all the elements of the ancient tales are there. And anyway, the guy's taken off. The stranger then ends up down the bog hole. So when the murderers arrive back, they're amazed to see the intended victim standing surrounded by loads of cattle, because he's robbed all their cattle by this stage. And saying, good Lord, what's this all about? So the intended victim then says, well, I have to thank you guys, for throwing me into that bog hole. He said that was the entrance to the other world. And I got a fantastic welcome from the She, from the fairy people. And they have rewarded me. I sang them a few songs and they have rewarded me with all these cattle. So then the two guys go and they run back to the bog and they dive in, and that's the end of it. But that story, there's a 19th century story. I think the earliest version I found of that story is about 1807.
Okay.
Right? But it has all the elements.
Sure.
It has all of the elements of the story that's told in the Kingship and Sacrifice exhibition,
Yes, indeed.
which we can now project back 4,000 years. I think that's quite an extraordinary range, and it can't just be coincidence.
That's fascinating. I've learned so very much. I had read a lot of your work already and watched some video, but I've learned so much more even today. So I really, really appreciate this opportunity, and thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us, Dr. Kelly.
You're very welcome.
Cheers.
Very welcome. Pleasure.